And hello, everybody. It's Sasha here. Hi. And I'm here today with Anita Bentata. She is going to, actually, this is a fantastic topic. I won't lie. I'm so excited. We're going to talk about how fairy tales apply to the dynamics of domestic abuse. So really, really cool topic. As you guys know, I am the Freebirds Director of Marketing and Finance. We did have Patricia here a moment ago, but we had some technical difficulties. She is all gussied up and heading out to a gala tonight. She's definitely wearing some gorgeous Freebird stuff. So I'm hoping we have a chance to get you some information on that later. But in the meantime, you're going to spend some time with me and with Anita, and we're going to talk about this amazing topic. So I'm going to toss it over to Anita first really quickly here. Anita, why don't you tell me a little bit more about yourself and your personal story?
Okay. All right. So a family of six of them, my mum and Sophie's, but there was a lot of emotional and psychological. It's kind of funny to say abuse because I never identified that I'd been in an abusive family upbringing. But the bottom line was that my needs and my reality were not included at all on a daily basis. And there was neglect there. And so I grew up feeling invisible, and that my needs, I didn't even realize that I had needs. It wasn't like, oh, I need this and would feel upset about it. It was like they didn't exist. So that was my growing up time. But we looked on the outside a good functional family. And so it was like behind closed doors, there was all this stuff that was cold and scary and unrealistic. And so I grew up and went out into the world with my boundaries about what was okay and my sense of myself really distorted, which then led me to be in a really abusive relationship. So that's a little bit of my background. But I got out with my two girls.
And that is so fantastic. And you know what? That's something to celebrate as well. So I really think that it's important for our viewing audience to talk to people and hear from people who do get out. And most of us on the Freeboard panel here, we are all survivors as well. So that's a really fantastic piece of information. I really appreciate you sharing that with us. So you definitely came from an abusive situation. So how did you get into this work?
Okay. Well, before I had been in that abusive relationship as an adult, I'd worked in accounts and I loved it because I think I was so uncomfortable around people. I'd been bullied my whole life from kinder or right through to when I left school at 16. I had no friends. As a family, we didn't talk to each other, even though it appeared we were talking to each other. So working with numbers, even though I was terrible at maths at school, working with numbers, I could do the adding up on the calculator, balance everything. It felt good. It was like comfortable and it was nice. All the numbers are in order and wasn't getting a lot of interactions with people that were too much for me to handle. But after I had my children, I wanted to be a stay-at-home mum with them while they were little. And I started thinking, I felt like I'd progressed as far as I could with working with accounts and bookkeeping. And I wanted to do something more with people, but I didn't have a clue what. And I didn't realize I was in an abusive relationship. I knew it was wrong the way he treated all of us, but I didn't know it was abuse. And when I finally woke up to it and left, the first thing was, I need therapy so that I make sure this never happens again. And it was in my therapy process over a couple of years of having one-on-one therapy and also being in group therapy that I thought, oh, I want to do this. So I became a volunteer at the counselling agency I'd been a client at, did their training, because I'd left school at 16. And so it was pretty scary, the thought of going to university. So I did the training, the volunteer training, to see if this is what I really wanted to do. And it all went from there. It was absolutely yes.
Oh, that's fantastic. And what a great story to be able to tell too. And absolutely fantastic. Now, how did you, so I get where you came from work-wise, and I kind of get some of your personal story, but how did you end up correlating fairy tales? I mean, that's just so unique to me.
Thank you. Well, I, as a child, the thing that helped me get through life was reading books, stories. That was, that was where all the good stuff was. So I'm always have been, always will be such a lover of stories, and the sense of not being alone when you can relate to what's happening in a story. So I think that was just the background of what I was in, in my system. But then when I then studied after university and did my basic counselling degree, a lot of trauma. So I went back to study and I did a private psychotherapy training course. And in that training, I worked a lot with, but also the unconscious and fairy tales and myths. So here I was absorbed in my study and working with the unconscious and dreams and all of that. So I was absorbed in stories and the beautifulness of, in the myths and mythology, how the gods and goddesses have affairs, fights, get mad at each other. And it's like, if these gods and goddesses have challenges with their everyday, then maybe we're not doing too bad as humans. Life is big and it is a challenge. And so it was that template, I think, that when I started working as a psychotherapist, I just found myself organically beginning with telling women the story of Little Red Riding Hood in my version. I started saying that we're taught very often as girls to be like Little Red Riding Hood, to be kind and nice, go look after other people. And we're not taught that there's woods out there, and in those woods are wolves. And we're not taught that the wolves don't follow the same rules that we are taught. And so when we meet the wolves, we think, I'll just do more of being kind and understanding and fair and nice, but it doesn't work because the wolf takes advantage of that. And so that was where it all started many years ago.
Okay, so it started with Little Red Riding Hood and the wolf, which kind of explains why you remind me of Little Red Riding Hood. But I think that's fascinating. Now, what has really enabled you to remain working in the field and being so passionate about it? I mean, that's really hard to find.
Thank you. It really, the bottom line is my anger, my anger for the suffering that I still see and hear, even though there's so much more awareness about domestic violence and abuse. What I'm hearing around me in Australia is people are talking about the same things as 20 years ago when I first started in the field, and that shocks me. And so the thing that I was seeing that was missing is that there's awareness, but people don't know what to say or do in their own community with the people that they feel like there's something not quite right going on. It's none of my business, or, everybody minimizes or brushes it off, or just doesn't even see it. It doesn't happen according to them in their circle, which I find to be really, really rare. So it was my anger, really, but it was also my grief for what I went through with my girls and myself, that I don't want any woman or child to go through what we went through. And it's just, yeah, that's my passion. There's so many myths and gaps still. He's talking about the missing pieces. I've got to do it. So I jumped in and became more active over the last couple of years.
That's a fantastic story. And you know what? And you're right, there hasn't been a whole lot of change. At least it doesn't feel like noticeable change in a lot of these areas, which is why conferences like our Free to Fly is so important, why organizations like the Freebirds are so important, because there's just not enough out there with how prevalent domestic violence and abuse really is. Now, I have to say, I'm curious. So I love the wolf analogy. I love Little Red Riding Hood. And you're right, even as a kid, I felt I might have been groomed to be that, but it could have just been the cookies. Nonetheless, I'm kind of wondering how we can tie that into some of the other fairy tales, because when I look at what you're doing, it's a little bit more broad spectrum. So kind of wondering how else we're conditioned.
Okay. All right. So I wrote a book, and each chapter in the part 2 of my book has a different fairy tale in it. So just naming the fairy is about, because that will give you more of an idea. So in part 1 of my book, I tell my story, and I tell 2 versions of Little Red Riding Hood, and I unpack a lot more about Little Red Riding Hood and the woodcutter. And yeah, in my own interpretations, I had great fun working with all the fairy tales. But then in part 2, I started off with Rumpelstiltskin. The story of Rumpelstiltskin, she's caught, and the only way she can get free is if she knows his name. And so for me, the first step is that we really need to know specifically what abuse is, because if we can't recognize the name, we walk past it. We don't so much going on. Abuse, because often when I ask people what is abuse, the definition is actually not clear, even to survivors, because I run a survivors group, and they start talking about the types of abuse. And my concern is if we only recognize abuse by the types, then we're going to miss it, because it's tricky and slippery. But when you can know the specific definition of it, then you can any form it comes to you, and not just the form you've been taught about. Because there's 14 forms according to me, of domestic violence. But if you know the definition of what it is, then you're okay. But in that chapter in naming, I get really specific about naming, because I also talk about the difference between abuse and conflict, because I find that's one of the blocks of why people don't want to have conversations, because they say, oh, I'm abusive too, or I'm in an abusive relationship, and people are blurry about the different definitions. So for me, naming and getting really clear and specific is really important. Then chapter 2, I talk about the handless maiden. I don't know if you know that fairy tale. It's one of my favorite fairy tales.
I feel like I do, but I'll admit you probably know more about fairy tales than I do.
Some of the fairy tales are really, familiar to most people, and some of the ones that I talk about are not as familiar, but I've just felt like they were the best ones to represent the dynamics. And it's an amazing fairy tale, one I resonated with when I was an early adult, when I first found it. And she lives with her mother and her father, and she's out in the garden helping, sweep in the garden. And the father is so self-absorbed in what he wants that he makes a deal with the devil to get what he wants. And he doesn't realize that in giving away to the devil whatever is behind the tree in there, that his daughter was there, and in exchange for that he gets whatever he wants, abundance, financial wise. And so the devil then comes to claim her, but she's so pure and she's clean, he can't get to her. And so there's a few attempts to try and get her, and the devil keeps trying to come back. And then the devil tells the father that you've got to cut off her hands, and then I'll come and collect her. And it's like, for me, this story really represents betrayal in the family. I know it's the parents just go along with it, and she does too, as a dutiful daughter, and how symbolically parents get so self-absorbed that they end up betraying their children, and the children dutifully, who've learnt by society, by religion, by culture, by patriarchy, to go along with and be submissive. And yeah, it's just shocking. But I won't tell you all the story because it's a really big story. But in the end, she leaves and goes out in the world handless. And she meets this king, and the king and his mother, and they love her. And the devil comes back again. But here you get an example of the unity, and I will not betray those that are important to me. And through that experience and through time of 4 significant people in community and in intimate relationship, of not being betrayed no matter what, she heals, and there is a returning to the king. culture and family and religion and patriarchy with the handless maiden. Then I talk about Bluebeard. You know the story about Bluebeard's seduction, I call it. Like, you know, he's not a really appealing kind of guy, but he's good at seducing and impressing and charming. He's a good charmer, but there's a side to him too. And he's got this room, and that's where the skulls and bones are of all the ex killed. And so this story of Bluebeard is the seduction that Mr. Hyde, and how we can get tricked as women, and what's missing that leads us to get tricked. And what's missing is kind of unpacked a bit in that chapter to do with our perceptions about love and what I call pseudo-love. But there's another fairy tale in that chapter as well, the ugly duckling. That not feeling that we fit in, and that ultimate need that we all have to belong. And so I combine in that chapter about love, Bluebeard and the ugly duckling, because that's just so important. Belonging is just a thing for all of us, no matter what. So that's what's next. Then I also talk about the little match girl. I don't know if you know the story of the little match girl. She comes from a pretty brutal, cold family, and she's sent out in the cold and the snow to sell matches. And nobody's actually around on that night because it's New Year's Eve and they're all in their warm houses, and she's shivering, but she doesn't want to go home because of what's at home. So she dares to light up one, and in that she imagines, you know, this hot wood stove eye. And she keeps lighting matches and seeing the things that her longings and her dreams and fantasies are for. And so in this chapter, I talk a lot about the hopes and the dreams that women have when they're caught in domestic violence, when there doesn't feel that there's any option of where to go or who to connect to, what door to knock on, that's just not part of the picture because she's in the stress response. Those options aren't available. And she's stuck in this hope, but this dangerous hope, because it's not hope connected to something healthy that's possible, but it's connected to unrealistic wishes. So that chapter is all violence and that unrealistic hope. And then I also talk the red shoes. I don't know if you know the story of the red shoes. Yeah, she puts them on and she can't take them off. And it actually becomes torturous for her. And so in this chapter, I talk about the stress response and what it does to our brain and our body, and how when we're stressed, the blood moves away from the front of the brain, our frontal cortex, where we can think about things and we can think about our feelings and feel about our thinking. And we're in our survival center. It's just about managing in the moment. And that just overrides everything. And that's why I want to have this conversation, so that we can talk about the trauma response, the brain and the body and the unconscious, because they're all vital factors to do with making a change about how we respond to domestic violence. But there's also something else that's really important in this chapter with the red shoes. Do you know that women have their own unique stress response?
No, we do.
Yes, and it was identified in the 90s, and most people don't know. And so I unpack about this because to me this is a vital piece that's missing in the conversation, because involuntarily when a woman is in stress, her hormones, her estrogen and her oxytocin levels are all mobilized to what Dr. Shelley Taylor calls the tending instinct. It's to tend, mend and befriend, so that whatever's going on, it's about keeping us all together. And if you think about the fight-flight response that's more masculine oriented, fight, idiocy, and she's about, you know, if you think about in our DNA of survival of the tribe, keeping it all together, not breaking up the family, not leaving, enduring to keep the survival of the tribe. And to me, that's paramount in the conversation, because women don't want to leave. They believe they're breaking up, opposed to actually his abuse and violence is breaking up the family. And so we need to recognize that the woman's in a stress response, and this is involuntary. And if that physiological component is not addressed about being in the stress response, you're talking to a different part of the brain, and you can talk till the cows come home on a rational, logical level to anyone, any woman. But if that stress response is activated, that is always going to be stronger. And so it's about knowing how to speak to that part of the person and how to engage with it so that all of who she is can be supported, because the survival response is going to overtake anything. So that to me is just so important.
You know, and you're right. I don't think that that's really necessarily talked about. I mean, the fight or flight response is very common, especially in domestic survivor situations. But you don't really hear about that female nesting tendency, I guess is what I'm going to call it for today, is that nesting tendency. And I mean, even in my own situation, and I'm sure in many others, leaving was counterproductive. I mean, exactly that. You can't. Yeah, I completely see where you're going with this. Now, what would you say is the core message to using these fairy tales as means to educate us?
For me, the thing is that if we talk from a fairy tale, people are going to be less defensive, because it's not so much pointing a finger at anyone. So there's more of the opportunity for the window to open to hear the information, because people don't have to justify about what they are doing or not doing. They can hear it, and then there's that automatic yes. And I think it's a gentler way to then start to then bridge to, how does that affect me? What can I do about that? What would work for me, depending on the person? So, I just think it allows a greater way to get out of the binds that we have in our culture and our habituated way of thinking and responding.
That's a very good core message, and very fair. Now, what would you want women out there, so the women that we have watching and the women that will watch even our replays later on, what would you want them to know about the fairy tales and about love and anger and being a woman? Like, what do you really need them to understand?
Okay. So it's like all of those pieces that I was talking about with those fairy tales are all important. To me, it's like, I don't know if you know that old Sufi story of the 10 blind men, and that an elephant comes to their village, and each one goes to a different part of the elephant and says, an elephant is like, a tree, for the legs, or a rope for the trunk. And it's like, none of them are wrong. They're all right, but they don't have all the pieces. So another thing is to be able to connect all of the pieces. And so all of what I've said so far is part of what I'd really want the women to know. Another part of what I'd want them to know, which is part of also my core message, is about connecting to our instinct, connecting to our body, because that's where action happens. Because when we just do it from our mind and thinking, we get caught in all the things of the constructs of our society and our family rules and everything. And we can see both sides, the shoulds and the passions. But when we connect to either this is good or this is bad, this is not okay, this needs action. And so being able to respond. And the story of Vasilisa and Baba Yaga is another one in my book. And it's a lot about the way through of listening to your instinct and how to be able to do that, to be able to negotiate the challenges of life and get through. So that's just so important, so that our past and our fear and social rules don't limit us, so that we can stretch our emotional muscle and go beyond and do what's necessary for the context that we're in.
Fantastic. So I'm going to kind of take us on a segue because I've just been dying to know here. But along with
Yeah.
your fairy tales, let's talk about the wolf, what the wolf doesn't want you to know. Because I know that you've got a new book coming out, which I'm just dying to read, but I kind of want you to talk to me a little bit more about it.
What the wolf doesn't want us to know.
Yes, please.
Okay. The wolf wants us to stay in his distorted reality. Yeah. And the thing is that when we so often, because of patriarchy and because of the wolves, we see ourselves through his eyes or through society's eyes. And so we need to be able to jump out of seeing ourselves through his eyes and be on our ground. And that means to be able to be with our anger, our experience of our own reality, and be able to act from that and be able to bear that it might look ugly or it might feel demanding, but there's a big difference between you using healthy aggression to fiercely stand up for yourself. And I'm not meaning physically confront a wolf, because you don't want to risk, but to be able to fiercely be protective for yourself, rather than be the little Red Riding Hood that the wolf would want you to be. And very often women will say to me that they don't want to be aggressive or arrogant, and so there's been all this misnaming about women's power. And we need to be able to connect to the whole of who we are. The Little Red Riding Hood aspects are beautiful, but that's not all of who we are. We're also, there's another chapter in the book about anger, and I bring in 2 fairy tales on that chapter. And one I bring in about Lilith. Well, she's not quite a fairy tale. She was there with Adam before Eve was there in the Bible. And she wanted to be equal with Adam, but he didn't want that. And so she left. She tried and got fed up with his unwillingness to be equal, so she left. But God went to punish her. So to me, that God of the Old Testament is very patriarchal. I'll shame you. I'll cast you out of the Garden of Eden if you want to know the whole truth and have power, I'll punish you. So to me, that's quite like the wolf. And so that's, the wolf doesn't want you to know everything, doesn't want you to have your whole power. And women need to be able to reclaim the fullness of the beautiful fierceness that's there to protect their life energy. So that's a big part of it. In Little Red Riding Hood, in the original story, she's knocking on the door and she doesn't want to go in. Her instinct knew, even though she loved her grandmother, she knew something wasn't quite right. But she listens to outside of herself and followed those rules and went in. And even when she's at the bed, she says, what big eyes you have, what big ears you... Again, she knows something, but who is she checking her reality with? With the one that's most dangerous to check it with. And so that's the thing that the wolf wants you to, for him to be your reality checkpoint instead of your instinct being your reality checkpoint, which would give a very different story to what the wolf wants you to think or know.
That makes perfect sense. And you know what? I have to ask the question, because I mean, I can see where the wolf fits in and where Granny fits in, and I can even see where Little Red fits in. But I've got to wonder where the woodcutter is going to fit into this.
Beautiful. I'm so glad you asked me, because I love the woodcutter. I love him just to bits. For me, Little Red Riding Hood left home with the messages from her mother that were not protective of herself, and there was no father there. And even though my father was there when I was growing up, for me it was a lot like that story of Little Red Riding Hood, because he was absent in the way a father needs to be there to teach us how to be out in the world. We need that constancy so that we can internalize it, to be able to negotiate what unexpectedly happens out in the world, out of our control. And come near Little Red Riding Hood when the woodcutter's nearby. So the woodcutter is another version of the father, but the woodcutter is temporary. He's not like a father that's meant to be there all of the time as a constant. Yeah. So when Little Red Riding Hood goes, so that to protect herself, because the woodcutter has some really important skills. Got to listen out for little things, yeah, for the tree falling, so he makes sure it doesn't fall on him, for if there's a wolf prowling around, to keep himself safe. So he listens to little things and he doesn't ignore them. So that's one of the things that Little Red Riding Hood needs, and that's what all of us women need, yeah, to listen to the little and not minimize it. The other thing the woodcutter does is that when he's going past grandmother's house, he hears an unusual noise. He doesn't say to himself, that's none of my business, I won't go in. He goes in there. He follows his instinct and he does what he feels. He doesn't think, oh, if, but, maybe not. He just does it. Because it's not going to be catastrophic if he gets it wrong. He can just leave. And he's prepared and willing for things to get messy. Yeah, he's got his axe and he'll be willing to use it if he needs to. Or, you know, in one of the versions, his scissors. Because he doesn't from the stomach, he cuts from the head. So he particular on how, but he's willing to make, and society very often avoid mess because you feel out of control and chaotic. So to me, the woodcutter has some beautiful skills that Little Red Riding Hood needs because she didn't get those messages from her father. If we all have them in our community, those attributes of the woodcutter, then things are going to be way different. Less room for the wolf to move because the wolf doesn't come when the woodcutter's around. So if we're all more active woodcutters, the wolf has to prowl, less room to attack.
Wow. So you're saying, just to make sure that I'm understanding, that the woodcutter is really your internal instincts that you were talking about, right?
Absolutely, the internal instinct, but also this is what we need in our community because the woodcutter fills the gap for when there's something missing. Yeah, he steps in. He doesn't go, it's none of my business. He goes, something's not right. And that's healthy community, yeah, when we can be proactive. It's not the bystander inaction that when people see and hear things and they think someone else will do something about it. The woodcutter steps in and is bystander action. And we need that for a healthy community when there's children and vulnerable women that are powerless because of their situations and their stress response and their isolation. We need those woodcutters to be active as well. Because my belief is that when we have more woodcutters out in each community, then women are going to know that the woodcutters are out there. It's actually going to be easier for them to leave because they're going to know that they're not the ugly duckling, that there is a place for them.
That makes perfect sense. And I really like that analogy. But I mean, at the same point, I know that, you know, we do end up isolated, and there are times that we don't necessarily have our woodcutters in our back pocket. So what can a woman really do to, well, anybody really, to begin to listen to those internal instincts?
Well, for me, in our modern culture, we value the mind and the sophistication of the mind so much, and it is amazing. But if we can't be in our body, then we miss out on an incredible amount of information because we've grown up in a society, in a modern world that says that the mind controls the body and the body is there to serve the mind. And I don't think that's accurate. I think our mind is the body as well. It needs to be both ways, not one way. And so we need to be able to find supportive and skilled people that can help us to how to be with our body and how to be with the uncomfortable feelings, so that we can build the emotional muscle to be able to be with what we see and what we think, and allow the unbearable feelings and unthinkable thoughts to be considered. And that means building emotional muscle. And I don't believe we can do that on our own. I couldn't do that on my own. I needed someone to witness me and teach me the things that I didn't know how to be with, because it wasn't modeled to me. We're social beings. We need each other. And so what for any woman, we need to be able to be in our body. Our body carries the unconscious. Yeah, we know that. For, like, if you haven't ridden a bicycle since you were a little girl, I imagine you know that even if you got on one now, you might feel a bit wobbly, but you'd be able to do it because your body would remember. Every cell carries memory. And so very often people in their lifestyles have come up with a lot of creative ways of not being fully embodied, because that's where the unresolved, uncomfortable material is. And so we need more resources, and we actually have them out in the world, but it's not in the dominant culture. There are fantastic ways of being able to metabolize and be with uncomfortable feelings and thoughts, and then for being able to be in our body and have that strength to be able to stand with what's going on. So there's amazing ways of working with the feelings and the body and memories that can heal it, because we can't do it by thinking from our logical, rational self, because that's a different branch in the brain. So a lot of suggestions in my book about what works. From, as a survivor myself, I had to go to a number of therapists, because I've met all these caring therapists, but they weren't telling me anything that could help me progress. I knew it made intellectual sense what they were telling me, but it wasn't hitting the spot, because I didn't know how to reach those places in the neural pathways. So there are ways of working, but it needs to be with skilled people that understand about trauma and how to stay in the body.
And yeah, that makes sense. And well, actually, it's fascinating. But so you've got a question here that I kind of wanted to talk a little bit more about. Now, it's about the most important first step for listeners in overcoming the unknown. And I like the way you phrase that. So I was hoping you could kind of walk me through your thought process behind it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, it's going to naturally be different for every woman's situation. Step. The thing for me is being able, because when we're in possible, because I was sitting in the doctor's clinic one day when I was still in the relationship and didn't realize it was abusive. And I went and read the notice board, and there was one of those bits of paper that says, does your partner do this? Does your partner do that? And in my head, I'm going, yes, to all of them. He's jealous, he's controlling. I can't remember it all. It was a long time ago now. And the bottom, it says you're in an abusive relationship. That was the first time I found out that I was in an abusive relationship. It was only when I was writing my book and I recalled that, I thought, oh my God, I went home and that totally disappeared from my awareness, because I might have been able to know that information, but I didn't know what first step to then do. I had to go back into survival mode to protect me and my children when I was back in the house. So I couldn't do anything with that. It was a totally different branch in the brain. So for each woman, the first step's going to be different. But what I found when I reflected in telling my story about, well, what enabled me to wake up and leave, was there were three elements. And so these might be helpful for other women. You know, 3 elements that helped me to get to my first step. One of them was people. The ongoing experience of seeing the fear in my children's faces kept me concerned something's not right, so that there was some door open. Do I need to do something, even though my fear stopped me from being able to do what I needed to do for a long time? But it was people outside of our home that made a huge difference. I didn't have any family talking to me. I was so isolated. I had no friends. So I didn't have anybody coming up to me ever, talking to me about what was going on. But every week when I would go shopping, the guys in the veggie shop were warm and friendly to me and my kids. And that to me was like an umbilical cord that the world still is friendly and welcoming. And that was vital. I used to look forward to my shopping trip every week because here there were these nice men. And then I'd go from the veggie shop across the road to the health food shop, and another nice man, and he'd let the girls punch our things through on the cash register, and he'd give them a sugarless lollipop. And it was this man, I don't know if he realizes what significance he played in my life, because he then suggested one day, because he knew how interested in health I was, why don't I go and do this macrobiotic cooking course? Now, I had no life of my own that I was never outside the house except for the children or, for the wolf. But I had an excuse to get out of the house for me, because cooking healthily is good for the whole family. And I got permission from the wolf that he would pay for these classes, and I would go once a week for a few weeks. And that opened the door to nourishing myself. And that door to nourishing myself then meant that I went back home and I started cooking, and I always cooked healthy. I never bought sugar stuff or anything. I was pretty healthy anyway, but it brought another level to my health. And I started getting up earlier and meditating and exercising for myself and cooking this way. And cooking macrobiotically is not just about what you eat, but it's the energy about how you cook it, what you cook, how you cut it, everything. And it's all about calming and centering and being aligned. And there was something about looking after brought a clarity, so that then after one incident when he hurt me, and it was in a game that he hurt me, but his son was distressed about it, and I heard him comforting his son, not coming to me, comforting his son and saying, it's all right, I'll never hurt you, I love you. And it was like this light bulb moment of, oh my God, he doesn't love me. But I really think the people and the self-care made a massive ability for me to hear that, because I don't think it was the first possibility of me being able to see and hear that kind of thing. But it shifted something in my survival pattern. And then the second thing, other than people, that helped me to open up to the abuse and the step to getting out was space. He ended up going into hospital with ill health, and the space away from him again got me out of the survival response. And I got clear when I was giving dinner to my 2 girls at the table, and it was so light and enjoyable and fun. It was like, oh my God, this is what life's meant to be. And so it was that space away from him that was also really, really important. So self-care, people, the space were really the keys. And so I'm suggesting that because I think they're common ones, I think, for other women in exploring how can they get their first step happening.
Oh, wow, that's fantastic. And you know what? I'm going to be right there beside you. I'm a huge advocate for self-care because, like you, in my situation, it was that ability to start learning how to care for myself that enabled me to see what was so wrong with the situation that I was in. So I think you're 100% correct. Having other supports around you, having other people to help you step outside of what becomes a very constricted bubble is going to give clarity and dimension. Now, I mean, in your case, you kind of found that through going out for groceries. And what about those women at home who are currently struggling and they're currently feeling that isolation? How do you recommend that they reach out and they do that?
Well, recommend there's, in wherever you are, there's going to be a helpline for women and domestic violence. So I'd really start getting connected to the There for Crisis, because they can help you through the overwhelm and that plan that needs to happen. But, the plan sometimes is very simple. It's not necessarily, for some women, it's not appropriate to actually take the time to do a plan. For some women, it's about getting out. I was fortunate. Those experiences, I needed more. There's steps. I was in hospital and I got clarity. When he came back, kind of, well, I'll go then. And then he started backtracking and go, oh, it's only bad because I've been sick. And I knew from day one it had been bad. He stalked me on the night I met him. So he then started about suicide thing, and he said, let's go to couples counselling. Well, I knew I couldn't, but I went along with it. The counsellor took me, excuse for him to leave the room, and took me aside and said, get out, get better, it will get worse. So, again, she's another person in that chain of events that helped me to get out and acknowledge the seriousness and the reality. So talking to a crisis service can help connect to the reality, because family and friends and the wolf are all more than likely going to be minimizing what's going on. And I think women in our coping and survival mode, we also minimize it because we have to manage and cope. We know how to read him and how it works. But the bottom line is abuse is unpredictable and it's not rational. So we're not as in control as we'd like to think we are, Asian. So I really encourage women to find a women's group, ring a crisis women's service. I run in Melbourne, Australia, a women's survivors group. And the women there that come say, as soon as I walked in from the first night, I didn't have to tell my story, but I felt accepted and safe. And so having that belonging can be powerful. So find that you can, and it might be in a book first off. That might be the first step for some women. It might be too much to ring a service. If you can find, whether it's my book, The Wolf in a Suit, or some other survivor's book, or reading things, or ringing a crisis service with the internet and things, and there's ways of being able to keep your history on the website clear so that you can be safe. So yeah, don't give up. Just if you try one thing and it doesn't work, just try something else. You'll get there.
Absolutely. And I mean, this is a great point for me to kind of jump in there with some shameless promotion, because part of what we're doing is to give women that outlet, that means to reach out. The Freebird Project is based exactly on that, helping with things like bills and our social programs and escape and just so many different things. So there are resources out there, but you know what, ladies, if you're out there and you need help, just reach out for it. It can come in so many different places and ways. Now, we've got about 25 minutes left to our session here. So I want to delve into a little bit more about you and what you can do for these women and what you can do for me. But the first thing I was kind of curious about is your business name is Activating Artemis. So I was hoping you might be able to explain to me where that came from.
Yeah, for sure. Well, when I started thinking about everything that I do, it's about activating people out of the bystander inaction. It's about activating women out of the survivor response and the tending response to be able to be their whole self. It's all about activation because there's been so much awareness till the cows come home, but we're not getting the activation. So I'm all about action and instinct. So to be able to activate out of the stress response. Artemis comes about because in women being able to reclaim the whole of who they are, to me, Artemis, she's from Greek mythology, is a really important figure that women can hold to. Artemis is there, she is unto herself, is a way of describing her. She's complete of herself. She doesn't need a man to make her be okay. She can love a man and want to connect with a man, but she doesn't need a man to be okay. She recognizes her completeness. She's very connected to nature and her body and her strength and capability and protecting herself. So she's very much inside her instinctual self. She is very connected to nature. And also, she's there. Artemis is the one that protects women and children and the vulnerable. So she felt such an important figure for me in regards to the work that I do. That and you know, she's one with the bow and arrow, and she has the connection to the moon. And to me, the moon connects a lot with illumination and the unconscious, and you know, she's just so embodied and powerful that she's the image that's very different to what our culture and society illustrate about women, that where it's all about beauty and image, and she's all about power and being unto yourself, being complete. So activating Artemis, I want that for each woman, and I want whole community and society to want that for each woman too, to enjoy seeing that. I saw on I can't remember whether it was on Instagram, I think it was Instagram, earlier this morning, this picture on a fashion Instagram thing of this famous person, and it's criticism of, oh, she's wearing her winter clothes and she doesn't look her usual beautiful self. And I looked at the pictures and I thought, she looks great to me. And it's like this expectation from women even that have absorbed this patriarchal view that we've always got to be sexualized, have the high heels that illustrates the arousal mode in the feet, have the red lips, and there's nothing wrong with wearing all of them, but there's this expectation that we constantly look in this sexualized arousal mode instead of, I have many faces, let me be all of who I am. So yeah, that's a bit about activating Artemis.
Absolutely inspirational and really intelligent. I really connect with that message. I think it's fantastic. Now, I want to touch more about the work that you're doing currently. So as I mentioned, you've got a book coming out. What else are you working on?
Okay, so my book, as I've talked about, I've got my launch in Melbourne in a couple of weeks. And as well as that, I run, as I said, my survivors group. So we regularly run social events for anyone that's in Melbourne. And I also do psychoeducational talks and workshops to help women who have left to keep their healing and moving on. As well as that, I'm training women now to be able to be volunteers to support a sister that's been isolated and is doing their healing. So, and the teach is relevant for all women, because we all are in relationships, whether with ourselves or other people. We all face boundaries and stress and love and all those. So I'm doing that. I'll be doing some webinars soon, continuing to talk about everything that I talk about. And I will be, there's more books coming out. I have written another book about how to talk to someone when you don't know what to say or do, because I don't think there's anything out there that really helps people to have those difficult conversations. And people very often jump to the end conversation of, he's no good for you, you deserve better than that, or you should leave. And that's not where the woman's at. She's in survival mode and she's maybe not even aware of it. And so there's a whole progression of, so I talk in that second book about how to get there. So if people want to, my website isn't, I have to relaunch it because I actually got hacked. And so I'm in the process, that'll be relaunched in a couple of weeks, but people can find me on Facebook and private message me their email address so that I can make sure that they're in the loop when everything's happening, because there'll be webinars and books. I've got a number of ebooks that people can access if they want to direct message me and find me through the Wolf in a free ebooks that women can extensive, and they contact stress response in there. So I'm going to, there'll be webinars, there'll be workshops, I'll be doing things online as well as offline. So yeah, there's always lots on the go.
Fantastic. So just to recap, you can reach Anita on her Facebook. She's actually also got Twitter, so you can definitely reach out. She's more than happy to keep in touch with you. And if you provide her, let me try that in English. If you give her your email, then she'll be able to keep you in the loop for some of the upcoming books, one of which I desperately need. So absolutely fantastic. Now, what is so different working with you as opposed to working with someone else in the same field?
My own experience that I find is that it's really important when you're working with someone that you've worked with someone that's done their own work. Because as a practitioner, I think this should be compulsory for all practitioners. One, if they haven't had the knowledge about trauma and how trauma really works and what's needed, because I hear about women all the time that are going to, even to trauma therapists that actually aren't up to date about what to do, and they're getting re-traumatized. They're getting re-exposure to their trauma, and they're leaving feeling the session's worse, but they're feeling like, I've got to bear this, I've got to get through this. So finding someone that's skilled in trauma, but also someone that's done their own work, whether they've been in abuse or not. We've all got uncomfortable feelings and unthinkable about our own story. And if we don't know how to navigate anger, fear consciously when we're working with someone, be willing to talk about it, but not work into it. The neural, when you're outside talking about it, get into where those neural pathways are. So the difference with me is how to resource a person so their system doesn't go in to be there. The other difference with me is that I'm willing to talk about the things that other people aren't comfortable to talk about. But I think growing up in a background where it wasn't okay for me to talk about anything, I've learned how to be able to talk about something in a way that a person can be able to bear, and do it in a way that so the suffering is meaningful and allows a resolution rather than just re-experiencing suffering again. But the thing with working with me is you don't have to work even face-to-face, online or offline with me. I've got, site comes up, I've got a number of ebooks about anger, about how to help your child. You know, there's a whole lot of things of information that I don't hear anybody saying. So it's like, if you connect with me, you're going to get new information that's up to date and current, and that I have the courage, I think, because of my childhood and from that relationship and going through 7 years of court to try and protect my children, and society not protecting me or my children. It's like nothing. Now, if I've lived through all of that and people didn't step up and do what they needed to do, I've got enough emotion to talk about the things that need to get talked about, what I talk about. But if it resonates, then follow me. I'll keep the conversation going in whatever form you want to, so that you can start to think differently rather than be the sheep of the way society wants us to fill the gaps. Because to me, there's a walking on eggshells in society. And so if you want to get out of that, stay in communication with me to build that emotional muscle, to be able to think differently and reclaim your own reality and your own thoughts and your own perspective about what's going on.
Thank you. Now, I mean, of course, I think everybody should just work with you. You have such a great handle and such a different perspective on things. However, if there are ladies out there in the audience that are considering working with someone to help with their empowerment, what are some of the things that they should be looking at to find the right fit?
Okay. So one of the there's a number of ways in working with trauma and abuse that are really important, and there is a recognition that is starting in the States that CBT does not work with trauma. That's been pushed time, but it's never, from my perspective and from the way that the people that are qualified the way I work would agree with. So find someone that works body-based. Somatic experiencing psychotherapists work with the central nervous system and the body, and they are excellent. So they're all around the world. The way I've been trained, it's a small school in Melbourne, and most of the people are either in Melbourne or there's some interstate, and some may do Skype work with people for online. So you can always go to the kairos.com, KAIROS, but look for somatic experience practitioners, but look for practitioners that work with the body and work with changing the brain neural pathways. So that means generally there's two modalities as well as the somatic experiencing or body psychotherapies. And everybody has a combination. The blessing of what I did is we got them all of these methods, which I think is really powerful when you've got more than one way of working with trauma. So we've got the somatic experiencing approach, but also about working with, I don't know if you know EMDR, eye movement desensitization reprocessing. So the training I did developed a further way of working beyond that way, but that is a very powerful way of working with trauma when you find a skilled therapist. The other way is working with the meridian system in Chinese medicine. Now, I can't for any of these things give a blanket, because it all depends on the therapist and their capacity to understand trauma and understand you as an individual and what your system needs. But these are generalizations that working with the meridian system, because Chinese medicine recognizes that the brain and the body is one, and that we store our feelings in our body. When we're stressed, the muscles absorb the stress to protect the organs, yeah? And we know cells carry memory. So our muscles carry a lot of stress. And when we're overwhelmed, there's a disconnect in our brain, but also in our energy flow. And so using meridian therapy, and there's a range of way of workings with the Chinese medicine approach, we can work with getting that flow back and helping the body re-strengthen and revitalize to be able to metabolize the feelings, the thoughts, and build the health back. So there's a range of ways working with the meridians that help thoughts, feelings, and physical health. So there are a few different ways of working to help support you.
Wow, that's very in depth. And you know what, this next one kind of comes out of me because I'm curious. So you mentioned a lot of methods and techniques that even I've used. I've used the MDR for my PTSD. So that, by the way, one of the best things ever. But I noticed that you didn't mention one that, I mean, personally, I did for 3 years and was extremely helpful to me, which is dialectical behavioral therapy. So I noticed that you were talking more about, you know, reprogramming your brain. There are conditions, and there's people like me where the brain is the thing that doesn't want to follow suit. And I mean, I'm one of those. I could try to teach my brain 6 million things. It's not going to get me anywhere. So dialectical behavioral therapy is almost the reverse. It's changing your behaviors to eventually then affect the way your brain works. What's your take on using it in this context for women with their regaining their power, I suppose?
Yeah. There's more ways of working, and definitely via the body is a really powerful way. And one of the ways that I've done it for myself in my own healing journey, out in the world, even like over the last few years, I've been really interested in salsa dancing and spent many hours salsa dancing. And one of the things out of healing with salsa dancing is that you've got to stay in your body, but you've also got to be attuned to the person that you're dancing with and read the signals, because the man's leading you, and they're very subtle signals. And it's a beautiful way of building your capacity to be able to stay with you and be with the other person. So there's many ways, as well as dialectical behavior therapy and salsa dancing. Like, even I used to lift weights, and I used to feel involuntarily when I'd be lifting heavy weights, like, you know, really heavy, I would be, and I don't necessarily recommend that now with where the learnings that I've come to now, but involuntarily what would happen is running through my system would be, oh my God, I am so strong. And that feeling of strength really transferred into other areas of my life as well. It really changed the way I experienced myself. So I think there's a variety of ways that we can, via behavior and via our body, absolutely. I guess I didn't talk about the DBT because I haven't experienced that. I know of it, but I haven't experienced it. So I tend to talk more about things that I know about. Otherwise, I don't feel like I can. The other thing I guess is, and I know you know, there's a lot of people that say really good things about it. The thing that and this is not a criticism at all of it, because as I said, I can't really do that in not having experienced it, is that very often I find people, when they're under stress or trauma, is that they believe they should do, for example, meditation or mindfulness because they're stressed. And I work with mindfulness, and I think it's vital, and meditation. But the thing is that for every person, there's going to be a different need. And when we've been in trauma and overwhelm, to meditate and be with mindfulness means bringing yourself into your body. And that's where the unbearable stuff is that's not resolved. So actually sitting still and meditating when someone's in a stress response can actually be the worst thing for them to do. So there's a whole lot of those factors that I like to individually check in with. What does this person need for them with where they're at? The other thing with what was I going to say? Oh, it's escaped me. There was something.
They do that. It's okay. You know, ideas, they come and go. But you know what? That's fantastic, and that kind of answers my question, because I can definitely see how that would work. And and some of the different applications. I really enjoyed that. Now, we're about to wrap up here, as much as I don't ever want to stop talking, and I love listening to you. But we are going to have to wrap up. So I was hoping you could take just a moment to recap everybody on how they can contact you, how they can follow up, where they can find you, all of that good stuff.
Sure, thank you. As you said, I'm on Twitter as Anita Bentata, ANITA BENTATA. I'm also on Instagram under my name as well. On Facebook, I'm under The Wolf in a Suit, which is the name of my book. If you want to email me, the quickest email address to get me right now before my website is live is my old email address, Anita@AnitaBentata.com, ANITA BENTATA.com. So you can email me that way and ask me whatever you want, or if you want that free ebook, The Ultimate Formula to Moving Forward, just let me know. Let me know what you want, or if you want to go on the list to know what's coming up. I think that kind of covers the basics of how to reach me.
That is fantastic. So I hope you guys all caught that. But if you didn't, of course, this replay will still be live on YouTube. Again, thank you, everybody. And thank you, Anita, for joining us. This has been a wonderful topic. And I'm going to be reaching out to you because I need to make sure I get a copy of that book. But nonetheless, for all of our viewing audience, thank you so much for joining me and for joining Anita. And you can always follow up. We've got more amazing sessions happening right through the month of November. So check us out at thefreebirdproject.org. And if you want to wear some of the gorgeous fashions, like I always do, because I love our fashions, and it's like wearing fancy pajamas. But nonetheless, if you want to come and purchase a few of these lovely pieces, and if you want to show your support that way, proceeds, and part of that does go through to victim support as well. So keep that in mind. You can find that at thefreebirdprojectshop.com. But otherwise, again, thank you so much, Anita, and thank you to all of our wonderful viewers for being here with us today.
Thank you so much, Sasha. It's been a delight talking with you.
Wonderful. Thank you, everybody. Have a great night.